Ethan Miller had only been working a few days when he knocked on the heavy oak door of his new boss's office. His voice trembled a little as he stepped inside. "Sir, I hate to ask this so soon, but could I possibly get an advance on my pay?" David Reynolds, the man who ran one of the largest insurance companies in the state, slowly set down the papers in his hand. His eyes narrowed. An advance in the very first week? Ethan stood there with his hat in his hands, his jacket a little too worn at the edges, his shoes polished but tired from years of use. He looked like a man who had worked hard all his life and never quite caught a break. To David, though, it looked like the beginning of yet another story he had seen too many times before. First came the polite words, then the requests, then the missing money. He leaned back in his chair, studying the older man. Ethan's voice cracked as he tried again. "It's for my granddaughter. She's been sick, and the hospital bills are piling up." David said nothing. He simply nodded and waved him out. But as the door clicked shut, suspicion had already settled in his chest. A new driver, asking for money in his first week. To David, it felt less like bad luck, and more like a warning sign. That night, David sat alone in his study with a glass of whiskey in hand. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock against the wall. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the way Ethan's voice had broken when he mentioned his granddaughter, the way he clutched his hat like a man on the edge. But David had been through too much to let sympathy cloud his judgment. Years of running a company had hardened him. He had seen assistants disappear with stolen files, employees misuse company cards, even a family friend who once drained his account behind his back. Every time, the story had started with a smile and a request. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass and muttered to himself, "They all start the same. Good manners, sad stories, and then the hand reaches a little farther." Meanwhile, downstairs in the staff quarters, the whispers had already begun. Two younger employees leaned near the kitchen doorway, just low enough to sound secretive. "Did you hear about the new driver?" one asked with a smirk. "Already begging for money?" The other scoffed, chopping vegetables a little too hard. "Give it a month. He'll be gone like the rest. Nobody lasts here." Ethan passed by quietly, carrying his worn jacket over one arm. He heard every word, but he didn't fight back. He simply lowered his head, stepped into his small room, and shut the door gently behind him. Inside, he sat on the edge of the narrow bed, pulled out a faded photograph from his wallet, and stared at it for a long moment. His granddaughter Anna, smiling weakly beneath hospital lights, tubes taped to her small arms. He whispered under his breath, voice breaking, "Just hold on, sweetheart, I'll figure something out." And upstairs, with the glass still in his hand, David Reynolds made up his mind. If Ethan thought he could hide desperation behind polite words, then David would strip the mask away. He would test him. He would find out exactly what kind of man this driver really was. The next morning, David called Ethan into his office. His voice was calm, almost casual, but his eyes followed every move. "I need you to run an errand for me," he said, sliding a thick envelope across the desk. "Go downtown, pay this invoice in cash and bring me the receipt and the change." The envelope was heavier than it should have been. David had slipped in far more than the bill required, enough to tempt anyone desperate enough to look the other way. Ethan took it with both hands, gave a small nod, and left quietly. His face gave nothing away. Out in the city, the sidewalks were crowded, horns blaring as the morning rush pressed forward. Ethan tucked the envelope close to his chest, each step heavier than the last. He thought of Anna, pale and weak in her hospital bed. That money could mean another round of medicine. It could mean one more night with the lights kept on at home. At the counter, he counted the bills carefully, sliding them across to the clerk. When the receipt and change came back, he paused. For just a second, he stared at the stack of bills in his hand. His fingers trembled, but he folded them neatly back into the envelope. Hours later, he walked into David's study and set the stamped receipt on the desk. Then, with steady hands, he laid the envelope down and counted each remaining bill, one by one, until every dollar was accounted for. David watched in silence, his jaw tightening. He had expected to see hesitation, maybe a missing note and a weak excuse. Instead, the old driver looked him in the eye with quiet steadiness. "Is that all?" David asked, his tone flat. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied softly. David leaned back in his chair, hiding his frustration. He wanted proof of weakness. Instead, he was left with a man who seemed unshakable. That night, glass in hand, David muttered to himself, either he's patient or he's waiting for a bigger chance. A week later, David decided the envelope test hadn't been enough. If Ethan was hiding something, it would take more than a stack of bills to draw it out. That morning, before Ethan came to pick him up, David slid a small leather case halfway under the front passenger seat. The clasps were left slightly open, just enough for the polished face of an old Rolex to catch the morning light. It wasn't his most valuable watch, but it was worth more than several months of Ethan's pay. When Ethan got into the car, he adjusted the mirror, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. As the car rolled forward, a glint of silver caught his eye from beneath the seat. He reached down, found the case, and carefully lifted the watch out. For a moment, he just held it. The metal was cool in his hand, heavy with possibility. His thoughts flickered to Anna lying in her hospital bed. The endless invoices stacking up on the kitchen counter at home. That watch alone could buy her another round of treatment. His throat tightened at the thought, but then he let out a slow breath. With steady hands, he opened the glove compartment and placed the watch inside, closing it gently as though locking temptation away for good. Later that day, as they drove back from errands, David leaned forward slightly, his voice smooth but edged with suspicion. "Did you notice anything unusual in the car this morning?" Ethan glanced at him through the mirror. His expression was calm, his tone even. "Yes, sir. I found your watch under the seat. I put it in the glove compartment so you wouldn't lose it." David didn't answer right away. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't expected. Surprise. No hesitation, no excuses, no fumbling for words, just the plain truth. He leaned back, masking his unease with a faint smile. "Good," he said simply. But as the city blocks slid past the windows, David's thoughts churned. He had dangled money, he had left valuables within reach, and still Ethan hadn't slipped. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. By now, the whispers around the estate had grown louder. People talked when they thought Ethan couldn't hear, but sometimes they didn't even bother to lower their voices. One afternoon, as he was pulling the car into the garage, the security guard leaned against the wall and smirked. "Word is you asked for money your first week here," the guard said. "That's bold. Most folks at least wait a little before they start bleeding the old man dry." Ethan froze, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. He could feel the heat rise in his chest, but he swallowed it down. Fighting back would only make it worse. The guard kept going. "I've seen plenty come and go. You won't last long either. Guys like you never do." Ethan stepped out of the car without a word, his shoulders heavy but his face calm. He walked past the guard, ignoring the sting of the words, and headed straight to his small room in the servants' wing. Inside, he closed the door and sank onto the edge of the bed. For a long moment, he just sat there staring at the floor. Then, with tired hands, he pulled out the same faded photograph he always carried. Anna, his granddaughter, smiling weakly beneath hospital lights. His eyes blurred as he whispered, "I'm not giving up, sweetheart. I'll keep going, for you." Upstairs, David heard fragments of the gossip from other staff members. They repeated the same doubts. "He's too old. He's already asking for advances. Just wait, he'll crack." And yet, the more David listened, the more conflicted he felt. Ethan's silence, in the face of ridicule, didn't look like guilt. It looked like dignity. Still, David couldn't let go of the thought that maybe, just maybe, the man was hiding something. It was close to midnight when David finally wrapped up a long meeting in the city. The boardroom lights had drained him, and his tie hung loose around his neck as he stepped into the cool night air. True to form, Ethan was waiting by the curb, the sedan idling quietly, headlights cutting through the dark. The ride began in silence. Streetlights flashed across the windshield, gold and white stripes stretching over the hood. David leaned back, weary, almost drifting into thoughtless rest, when a sudden vibration shattered the stillness. Ethan's phone lit up on the console, buzzing again and again. His hand hesitated on the wheel, unsure whether to reach for it. "Take it," David said firmly. Ethan swallowed hard, pressed the speaker button, and a woman's frantic voice filled the car. "Dad, it's Anna. She's struggling to breathe. The doctors say it's worse this time. They need us at the hospital now." The words cracked through the silence like glass breaking. Ethan's knuckles turned white around the steering wheel. His chest rose and fell too quickly, and his lips moved in a shaky whisper, almost a prayer. "Please, not tonight." David sat up straight, startled by the rawness of what he was hearing. "Who was that?" he demanded. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. The only sound was the soft squeak of the leather steering wheel under his grip. Finally, his voice came low and broken. "My granddaughter. She's fighting cancer. They said she might not make it through the night." The air inside the car grew heavy, pressing down on them both. David felt his throat tighten as pieces of the past weeks rushed back. The request for an advance, the tired eyes, the gossip, the envelope of untouched cash, the watch returned without a word. He had tested this man again and again, waiting for him to fail. Yet here he was, carrying a burden no one should carry and still refusing to cross the line. David turned his gaze to the blurred city lights streaking past the window. For the first time in years, he felt something crack inside his chest, a quiet shame he couldn't quite name. The car sped down the highway, but inside it felt like time had slowed. David sat upright now, no longer the relaxed executive on his way home, but a man staring at something he couldn't quite understand. He studied Ethan's reflection in the rearview mirror. The older man's jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on the road, but there was no disguising the tremor in his hands. It wasn't the trembling of a guilty man caught in a lie. It was the trembling of someone holding himself together by a thread. David's thoughts spiraled. If Ethan was so desperate, why hadn't he taken the money from the envelope? Why not the watch? Why keep working long hours, suffering the whispers and ridicule, when a single dishonest choice could have eased his burden? It didn't add up. For years, David had told himself that everyone had a price, that integrity was just a mask people wore until the stakes were high enough. And yet here was this man, drowning in hospital bills, watching his granddaughter slip away and still refusing to break. He felt anger rise, though not at Ethan, at himself. Had his suspicion blinded him? Had his constant need for control kept him from seeing the truth? His voice came out sharper than he intended. "Drive to the hospital." Ethan's eyes flicked to the mirror, startled. "Sir, that's not necessary. I can take you home first. I don't want to trouble you." "Just drive," David cut in, his tone firm but different now. Not cold suspicion, but something closer to urgency. For the rest of the ride, neither man spoke. The hum of the tyres and the occasional sweep of headlights were the only sounds as the city rushed past. And in that silence, David's certainty, the belief that loyalty was always an illusion, began to unravel. The sedan rolled hard to a stop beneath the harsh glow of the emergency entrance. Before the engine could quiet, Ethan was already out, moving faster than David thought a man his age could. His back was straight, his stride urgent, as he pushed through the sliding glass doors. David lingered at the curb for a moment. He could have stayed behind, told himself this wasn't his business, but something deeper pulled him forward. Against years of habit, he followed. Inside, the smell of antiseptics stung the air. The hallways echoed with the rush of nurses, the steady beeping of machines, the quiet sobs of families folded into waiting room chairs. This was not the world of polished boardrooms or guarded estates. This was a place where everything was fragile, where seconds mattered more than money. Down one corridor, Ethan stood at the bedside of a little girl. Anna's chest rose in shallow breaths, her tiny arms weighed down by tubes. His daughter sat beside her, pale with exhaustion, holding the child's hand as if her grip alone could keep her alive. Ethan dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to the blanket, whispering her name again and again through broken sobs. His shoulders shook with each breath, years of silence giving way to raw desperation. David froze in the doorway. For so long he had believed people were only masks, that loyalty and honesty were just words. But here there was no mask, only a grandfather begging for more time. Shame burned through him. He thought of the envelope, the Rolex, the cold tests he had staged while this man carried a burden heavier than anything money could measure. He stepped back into the hallway, pulled out his phone and dialed with shaking hands. First his office manager, then the hospital's billing desk. He didn't ask for estimates. He didn't ask for timelines. His voice was clipped, commanding, but softer than it had been in years. What will it take to clear the balance? Tonight, every bill, every treatment moving forward, I want it handled before morning." When he hung up, he leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. For the first time in a long time, David Reynolds felt small, and for the first time, he wanted to. The next morning, Ethan was called into David's study. He looked exhausted, his eyes red from a night spent at the hospital. Still, he stood tall, hat in hand, uncertain of what waited for him on the other side of that door. On the desk lay a thick folder stamped with the hospital's insignia. Across the top, in bold black letters, was a phrase Ethan had never dared to hope for: "Paid in full." He froze where he stood. His lips parted, but nothing came out. His hands trembled as he reached forward, brushing the edge of the folder as though it might disappear if he touched it too firmly. David leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, had softened. "I tested you, Ethan. Again and again. I left envelopes full of money. I left a watch where you'd see it. I let the gossip sink into your skin. I was waiting for you to fail, because I believed everyone eventually did." Ethan swallowed hard, eyes filling. He shook his head slowly, still too stunned to speak. David's gaze held steady, though guilt flickered across his features. "I didn't pay to buy your honesty," he said quietly. "I'm paying back the lesson you taught me. You showed me that integrity doesn't vanish when life gets hard. It shines brighter." He tapped the folder with his hand. "From today, you're more than just my driver. You'll manage my household, oversee the staff. And as for Anna, she'll get the care she deserves, no matter how long it takes." Ethan pressed a trembling hand to his mouth. Words failed him. At last he managed only a whisper. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." David leaned back slowly, exhaling as if a weight he had carried for years was finally slipping free. For the first time in a long time, he felt something close to peace. That afternoon, sunlight poured through the tall hospital windows, painting the sterile floor in warm gold. Ethan sat beside Anna's bed, her small hand resting in his weathered palm. She stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering, and for the first time in days she managed a weak smile. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice fragile but steady. "Are we going to be okay?" Ethan's throat tightened. He blinked back tears, squeezing her hand gently. "Yes, sweetheart," he said softly. "We're going to be okay now." Through the glass panel in the door, David stood watching. He didn't step inside. He didn't need to. For years he had lived with suspicion as his closest companion, convinced that loyalty and honesty were illusions. Yet here, on the other side of the glass, he saw a man who had proved him wrong. Not with grand speeches, but with quiet choices that cost him everything and still left him whole. David turned and walked slowly down the hallway. His reflection stretched along the polished floor, the afternoon light catching his shoulders, as if even the building itself was releasing him from the shadows he had carried. Behind him, Ethan bent low, pressing his forehead to Anna's hand, whispering a prayer of thanks. Ahead of him, David whispered his own kind of prayer. Not to God, but to the rare reminder that money could not buy the things that mattered most. For the first time in years, both men carried something they thought they had lost. Ethan carried hope and David carried trust. And in that quiet moment, each of them knew that was the kind of wealth that lasts. True integrity isn't proven when life is easy, but when everything is falling apart. And holding on to honesty in those moments is worth more than all the wealth in the world. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time. If you found meaning here, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need this message today. I'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.